We acknowledge the original owners of the land on which we podcast, whose stories were told for thousands of years. Today, we are recording in Meanjin. We pay our respects to elders past and present who may be listening. Sovereignty was never ceded. A quick note before we get started that there may be some swearing in today's podcast. If you don't like swearing or usually listen with children in the car, you have been warned. You're listening to What in the NDIS Now, a podcast where I, Hannah Redford, and my friend Sam Rosenbaum interview participants and providers about all things NDIS.
Hey, how you going? The episode you're about to hear is from our live show of 2025. We were so excited to bring you the live show. It was so much fun and we had great discussions. I hope you really love it. Right before we get into it, I do just want to thank all of our sponsors so much. We couldn't have put on the afternoon without you. So in no particular order, here are our amazing sponsors from the live show. Thank you to the Sunflower Hub. Thank you, Just SDA. Thank you to Amend Rehab. Thank you to Back to You Therapy. Thank you to QSSS. Thank you to Plan Decoders. Thank you to Bella Linda Smart Displays. Thank you to Sage. Thank you to Good Rose Support Coordination. Thank you to Growing Daily. Thank you so much to Gersol Support. Thank you so much for coming so far to Seaside Support. Thank you to Alpha Care and Share. Thank you to Fuel Your Life. And a huge thank you to all the amazing young people and young at heart people who were there from Coffee Nuts. The coffee was amazing and the cold drinks were definitely needed as it was a very hot day. We really want to say thank you to Rex and Fran Ashenden for their support of the podcast. They sponsored the live episode as well. So thank you so much to them. It's really awesome to have that support to be able to put on these awesome events. We are so excited to bring you this episode and I hope you enjoy. Hello. Thank you so much all for being here. We are so excited that you're all here. So first up, the crew here at What in the NDIS Now would like to acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal people whose land on which we podcast. We acknowledge their elders past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Okay, let's get going. Please welcome to the stage the First, before I do that, I want to thank so much our official photographers who were Eleanor and V. And I want to thank Ellie, our amazing producer, for plugging in everything without whom the podcast could never ever happen and get out to all of you. So I would like you all to give a big warm welcome to the stage the co-host who runs with too many ideas at once. He's your favourite and mine. It's Sam Rosenbaum.
Thanks, Hannah.
You did a costume change.
Yes, I've got to keep on brand. Outrageousness is style. For those who are not in the room today, I am wearing a ridiculously bright multicoloured shirt with blue shorts, and this is my second costume change for the day, keeping in style. And we had the first one was the emoji outfit that I think some of you listeners might have tracked down from last Christmas party.
Oh, yes, yes.
Same emoji outfit. But thank you, Hannah.
What have you been up to?
Well, I have been enjoying meeting all the lovely people coming to today's session and meeting all the sponsors and getting organised and sweltering a little bit, hence why I'm very glad that I went for 2 outfits for today. Actually, technically it was 3 because I had a bump-in shirt too. Yes,
well, that's very true. Well, I've been protesting.
You have. There's been lots happening.
Yeah, to make sure trans young people's human rights are upheld because they're not being in the state of Queensland.
No, it's been a very disappointing week coming from the Queensland government.
Yes, and hopefully you all listened to the episode that came out on Monday and you would have heard the speech that I gave at the protest because that was kind of cool.
It was. Well done for doing that.
Thank you.
The community thanks you for your activism.
Yeah, well, I just have to. Yeah. Sam, is there a musical instrument that you're good at doing the air version of?
No.
No. Neither me either.
I can pretend a drum roll.
Okay, so this fits in nicely with what I'm about to say because I like doing air drums, but whenever I do air drums, I look like someone who's going through a cobweb because I'm in, which is really annoying for Ellie because she's actually a drummer. Okay, so I guess it's time to introduce our panel.
Yes.
All right. With 20 years working in governance, quality and risk for organisations who support and advocate for the most vulnerable and at-risk people in society, he has the passion and drive to improve the disability and aged care industry and to change the conversations we have as providers in how we support those we are charged to serve. His current role is as QSSS Chief Operations Officer. He works with an amazing team showing the rest of the sector how to be uniquely simple. From episode 44, please welcome Greg Facoory. Okay, our next panellist was supposed to be Sarah Raphael, but she got sick. So I'm going to say her intro anyway, just so when she hears this, she knows what I was going to say. Our next panellist is our favourite speechie from New Zealand. She has worked in Scotland and Australia, mostly focusing on acquired brain injury, stroke, neurodivergent conditions and swallowing disorders, backed by her published research in the field of dysphagia. She currently leads the allied health team at Amend Rehab from episode 24 all the way back in season 1. That's about Sarah. Who we have today, who I asked at the last minute when they arrived, we have Esther Syred. Please come onto the stage. Esther is an amazing behaviour support practitioner and has also been on the podcast, although I can't remember which episode number that was. Okay. Our next panellist is the founder and managing director of Just SDA. He has a passion for creating pathways for people with disabilities to purchase and own their own homes. He serves on multiple boards for advocating for people with disabilities facing barriers in employment and access to services. From episode 38, please welcome Justin MacDonald. And last but not least, our next panellist today is a physiotherapist who loves AirPods. He not only has a Bachelor of Exercise Science, but a Master's of Physiotherapy and a Graduate Diploma of Occupational Health and Safety. He has special interests in working with people with neurological conditions. After starting Back to You therapy, he has quickly expanded to offer OT services as well as taking on more physios so that he can reach more people. He is a man of many talents. From episode 19, please welcome Julian Carmichael. Did you like my joke?
I did. Are you going to explain the AirPods thing?
Context, Hannah. Context is important.
Okay. So the first time I ever met Julian, he gave me his brochure and I went, that's a good photo of you. You were wearing AirPods. Was that deliberate? And he went, oh my God, I didn't notice. And I hoped no one else would either. So
You're the first one to pick it up straight away.
I'm so annoying like that. So what we thought we'd do today, rather than have a set lot of questions, because our podcast always is pretty conversational, what we wanted to do is just have more of a set of themes that we kind of want to talk about. So our first theme that we wanted to talk about is home and living. Sam?
Oh, right. Sorry, I was just asking Jason to close the back door there. Thanks, Jace. Well, Justin, this is a big part in your department.
It's pretty much my life, really.
Yeah, you live and breathe this.
Pretty simple. Like we've got an hour and a half, so we could probably cover home and living within 3 minutes.
Look, I feel like Esther beside me would enjoy the attention being taken off her.
Well, as a speech she,
and for those that are listening and wondering about Esther's episode, it's episode 39.
Oh, thank you.
But Justin, do you want to sort of maybe go through, because this is about the NDIS has been changing very rapidly over the last 3 months, 6 months, and year and a bit. Deep breaths. But more so, we're seeing the outcomes of the NDIS review, what the government is starting to look to put in place, and we're starting to see, for those of us that live and breathe this, we're starting to see what things could start to look like as well. And at the centre of all of this is the person and the people that we support. What has been some of the first big things with all the changes that you've heard participants screaming out, what the hell? Or what has been the big reactions that you've seen in the space?
Yeah, it's where do we even? This is massive. So let's try and summarise the best we can. So I'm still waiting for the response from the federal government on the quality. Like we did a Royal Commission a while back. I don't know if you guys remember it. Just waiting for a response on that too, because there hasn't really been a really well descripted, well articulated response, and I think that will kind of help inform the framework on where we go next. Because there's been a lot of, I guess, scaremongering, I think, over the last 12 months, and I don't know how everyone else feels in the sector, but for me, there's probably been more change in the last 12 months than there has in the last 12 years in the sector. And I'm just fatigued. I'm just exhausted about keeping up with the legislation, the changes, and the yes list, the no list, what's in, what's out, shake it all about.
Yep.
But yeah, the big things we're seeing is we are seeing some positive determinations in some of the SDA space, which is for people that don't know SDA. If you look at the entire broader scheme of NDIS's 680,000 participants, SDA supports those that may have extreme functional impairment or high care support needs that can't live in mainstream housing or won't thrive in mainstream housing. So we're talking the supporting between 24 to 30,000 of the 680. So we're talking a very small niche. So what we're seeing is some of the outcomes are positive, but they're taking a long time to get there. And what used to be 3 months is now 6 months, which is now 9 months. And we had a resident move in on Monday. She got her approval Christmas Eve. Not a bad Christmas present, I must say. But she had to wait 13 months for that Christmas present. So, you know, the time it takes for that, the fatigue and the time and the interactions between the agency to get an outcome has just been really exhausting. So that's good, but it's just taking too long. I think the legislation change, how that was approached and how that was engaged in a co-design or I'd probably argue maybe not a true co-design response, given that I teach co-design and design thinking. I think that could have been done a little bit better. And just this focus on fraud, like it's everyone I speak to is just worried about this fraud thing, whereas for me, I think that's like a true magician. If you find a focus on the fraud side of thing, that takes focus off the other inefficiencies, which for me is the actual articulating and running of the scheme. Because if I've got to follow up for that lady that moved in, every week we're making a phone call. The individual's making a phone call, their support coordinator makes a phone call, someone's taking that phone call, and that's times 52 weeks of phone calls. That's a lot of hours, a lot of labour and those things. Whereas if we got that right, then we can actually save the scheme as well and stop this whole scaremongering thing too. So I'm actually pretty optimistic on where we're at now. Things have slowed down a bit, and I think that I'd like to think that's planned. But I think what it's actually is Parliament haven't come back to House yet, or they have just, but we're about to go into caretaker mode for the federal election as well. Okay. So that could be announced in, they reckon, the end of March or the end of May is probably the dates at the moment. So if it's March, that's in the next 2 weeks. So caretaker mode means the new minister that's been appointed, Amanda Rishworth, may not even have time to even put anything to action. So we'll see what happens as a result of those changes, and who knows what's going to happen there. But I'll just plant the election seed there, because that could have a big impact on our sector too.
I do have quite the political question that I want to ask, but I'm not going to, because this is not necessarily the podcast to ask about certain exiting ministers and the time frame on that.
Yeah, I think I called it the seagull effect. But for those that don't know the seagull reference, it's someone that might come in and make a lot of noise, basically do certain things on everything and then just disappear. And that seems to be how I kind of felt. That's how that all happened and played as well, and just left a very big pile of stuff for someone else.
It definitely, well, I've said it before on the podcast. But you did sort of mention specifically around that co-design. One thing I've sort of started seeing within the quality space, especially with Natalie Wade coming in as the Assistant Commissioner for provider registration. It seems like they're putting a lot more emphasis and talking around quality metrics within practice standards as well, specific within the home and living space. Have you seen too much on that?
We haven't been exposed too much at an SDA. I think the only interactions we've had are just some of these tasks all sort of been created to kind of almost audit and just put checks and balances in around separation of duties and control, which is really important with housing. So for those that aren't familiar, again, you really want a housing provider as one separate party to the care provider, so you don't have that conflict of interest inherent. And there's a task force there, but the problem is that task force has reached out to us, and we need to provide every participant in every property and their address, when they moved in, all of those things for them to fulfil this work. So it's quite heavy and manual. And that's 200 hours I've got to find to be able to do that, because we're looking after more and more people, and it's probably 45 data points per person. So I think it's welcome and it's good, but there's no real support in place for a provider to be able to cope with that level of information. And it's the Quality and Safeguards Commission, and they're kind of similar to the NDIS, and they could probably get the information across if they wanted to, but
It especially has been quite interesting on that information across, because as you said at the start, we had a half-hearted response to the Aged Care Commission, Royal Commission, and then we've had nil set and response by action, proxy response by action, which doesn't necessarily align with what's meant to happen either. If I can open up to the rest of the panel, with where you've been engaging with participants and have been looking in that housing living for applications within OT and species sort of points, and also yourself, Greg, losing my voice. And I'll see yourself, Greg, with participants. How has everything really been impacting the people you guys are working with from the front baseline level?
So from us, the biggest impact on, especially, I guess, our OTs is we're now getting directed or stated the amount of hours we can use to write a certain report or something like that to have the application or provide that support. And those hours are well under what our normal standard is. And so we're having to work out how to provide the same detail of information in a much less time frame that we're given. So,
okay, that's have they, when they've been, because I haven't actually seen this yet, so I'm going to go do some research when I get back home. But we've only had two. It's happened twice in maybe the last 2 months. Okay. So it's not everyone, but there are ones where they're like, you need to provide an FCA or an SDA report, and this is the hours you've been given, and the support coordinator saying this is from the NDIA,
you're not getting any more hours.
Oh, okay. Are they giving guidelines around how they're actually putting that out?
Useful.
No. I have heard about this happening too, and I think it puts OTs in a really tricky spot because they're always wanting to provide really quality information, and I don't know an OT who enjoys sitting for hours and hours writing useless information. They are only writing useful information. And so for the NDIA to turn around and say, oh no, actually, this isn't, you've got to do all of this information, but we're not going to give you the time to do it. It's so disrespectful to our OTs, and it really, really pisses me off that that's after they've gone after support coordinators and they've gone after plan managers, and to go after our OTs is mind-blowing to me because they are only putting in reports what they think is really necessary. And yes, sometimes that means a 40-page report to get across what is needed. But and also then to not give any hints about, well, you've only got 4 hours to write this massive report. We're not going to tell you what we actually want written in that report. You have to guess. It doesn't make any sense.
I think there's a danger of a false economy there too, because if you get a report right and you kind of articulate all the components, you do the research at the outset, you can actually set the right plans and schedules and supports in place too. Now that's assuming that the reports are read in detail on those things. So if you spend a little bit more at the outset, I don't know what you sort of feel about it, but if you spend a bit more time at the outset, you could potentially save the scheme in some ways because you're not over-prescribing or just that one-size-fits-all approach too, and it just gets that more tailored approach, which is hard. Disability is so unique and so individual. Just getting it, you can't just do a one-size-fits-all. So I think just getting it right there, just saves time, saves effort, and actually probably, if reasonable, necessary, and affordable, sustainable, that's the one, just makes it more sustainable. So I think it's almost shooting yourself in your own foot. Same with housing decisions.
So that disrespect it's more than just the time in which an OT is allocated to or funded to do a report. It's also the disrespect also comes into we'll fund you for X number of hours to do that report, but we'll take what appears to be 15 minutes to read it. And it goes back to that esoterical list of criteria that the NDIS does or doesn't have as to, does it tick a checkbox as to, I'm looking for these specific buzzwords or these specific sort of things. To the best of my knowledge, nobody really knows what that is. For all we know, it could be, it doesn't say the word pineapple, so it doesn't count.
Note to self, put pineapple in every report.
I literally was talking to someone about this yesterday. I wish we could put a little code word somewhere in the report, and then a participant or their family can kind of ask the planner to tell them the secret code word.
Just make sure you have pineapple.
Just for that,
So it's almost like we're in recruitment industry and we're having the ATS read our resumes.
But I guess the other issue is around NDIS literacy for those health professionals who are doing those reports, because to the best of my knowledge, and obviously I'm not an OT, there's not that here's how to write a report for the NDIS, ticking all the boxes that they are looking for, regardless of what you're seeing in front of you. How do you word it in a way in which they're going to stand up or sit up and listen? And even the most compelling cases fall by the wayside because of whatever reason, whether it's because the skills of the assessor that's actually looking at it, or whether it's because it hasn't had pineapple in the report. It's really hard to figure out where anybody stands, when it comes to advocating for a participant for something that it's clear as day that they need.
And you'd mentioned about the inefficiency, and I think, I guess working in behaviour support, what I can see is that when there's a lot of delays and when there's all this uncertainty of, I feel like my whole life is going to fall apart if I don't have this access to the funding I need, and if that's over someone's head, then that is also a lot of, the specialist therapist time that is actually, supporting someone through, it feels odd to be an NDIS funded support that's supporting someone when a lot of the underlying kind of presentation is anxiety around the NDIS funding, and, for some people it can feel a little bit frustrating of how about not paying specialists their hourly rate, can we just have a bit more flexibility in how this funding is used or that to meet their needs, because while we're waiting for all of this, I think we've got to remember the human cost here as well. That this is someone's life and their whole family. It can feel like limbo,
Well, I guess
and it
that's
can be
the
really
problem.
paralysing.
It's words on a page. It's not actually. It's easy to disassociate yourself from someone when all you got is words on a page and a checklist and yeah.
What we've been finding with that kind of, what you're saying, almost like with the pineapple and words on the page, is they're taking single sentences out of a 40-page report and they're using that sentence out of context to decline something.
So they're taking a current book out of Labor's and Liberals' early campaign strategies. Right. Not surprised.
I'm not biting into politics just yet. We'll give another 5 minutes. But
all right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for that.
I was going to ask one thing about behaviour support, because you also have to write big reports. And are you finding it sometimes a struggle when you're not putting pineapple in your report?
I've started a trend.
They're picking that up. Yeah, and a bit like Julian pointed out, if it's got one sentence that is wrong, that's it. That person doesn't get that funding. Are you finding that too?
I think it's a little different because the standard practice I talk to their behaviour support needs, and for the most part I try to encourage that their other support needs are covered by a functional capacity assessment by an OT or the other allied health, that's kind of their specialty. But obviously when it's their behaviour, their behaviours or their restrictive practices that kind of then underpin their support needs, I can speak to that. But I don't know, maybe I have a little bit more when there's restrictive practices. I think that sometimes because we can talk to that, it kind of, if that's their requirements, we can say, well, based on your own requirements, we probably have that little kind of thread to tug on, I guess. But I did make the mistake once of saying, hey, look, well, if you choose one-to-one funding, you're going to need a whole bunch of behaviour support. Or, no, the other way around, sorry, you won't really need that much. If things are cruisy, it's okay, Or if you are going to drastically change their funding, they're going to need so much behaviour support. And unfortunately what happened was the support funding was the lower amount, but the behaviour support funding was also the lower amount. So it was kind of what you were saying about, maybe taking a few sentences. So I've learned not to do that again, not to give them a little a la carte menu kind of a thing, but just to say,
And we've seen this really interestingly in the housing space. So with a physical disability, the agency can sort of see a chair and those sort of things too, but the psychosocial space is really challenging, and I've been working with an amazing care provider, one of my favourites in the world, and they've been supporting this individual on their journey for 13 months to get SDA funding approval. So they got knocked back once, not for any SDA funding, not for robust funding, which is what they needed, but for any SDA funding in any shape or form. We went back and challenged it again, it got knocked back again, and it's now sitting at the ART. 13 months it's taken as well, and their argument was, because we've settled this individual into this home and he's got the right supports around him now and he's thriving, he's done really, really well, so we finally got the right care and package as well. They said, everything seems fine, you don't need the funding, was the kind of argument that came back. So we've now, sadly, we've had to represent him back to hospital because we don't have the SDA supports in place, we don't have the SIL supports in place, and we've got quite a lot of money owing to a lot of people. So he's now back in hospital in a horrible environment just because of the system just failing him. And that's just one of many that we've dealt with over probably the last 12 months or so. And that's 13 months of, again, the inefficiency of the phone calls, the messages, the emails, the 19 stakeholders on a meeting with public guardian, public trustee. Greg, you know this firsthand.
Yeah.
It's tough. But are you seeing much of that in the space you're operating in as well with the psychosocial space, like the non-physical disabilities, or?
I
thought from the care either, Esther. Yeah.
Well, from a support provision perspective, I mean, we do things a little bit differently in that, we've had experiences similar to what you're talking about. We'll advocate on, trying to help put a case forward in getting someone in a better environment so that they can thrive. Once again, clear as day that this is the right thing to do, but for whatever reason, it drags on and drags on and drags on. 12, 18 months. And, it's, once again, it goes back to the check boxes and all that sort of stuff. And yet the challenge is that here's a person who's actually suffering in a situation that they shouldn't be in, might be separated from family, might be, isolated, whatever that picture looks like. And because of, once again, that theoretical checkbox, it's not ticking all of those boxes, and it delays. And so we've been on those Teams calls or Zoom calls on with multiple different providers, all with different stakes, all doing it, pro bono, which is cool. I mean, I keep on saying, if in this industry, if you're not doing stuff pro bono, then are you actually sort of, is your heart in the right place? That might be a little bit unfair, but there's a reality to that. It's really challenging when here's a real person that we've met, we want to advocate for, and yet for whatever reason there's red tape in the way that actually is putting this person at harm. It's challenging.
Yeah, well, I'm really grateful for everyone's input in that. So I'm going to move us along. And our next theme or subject is the dreaded yes-no lists. And in some ways, for some sectors, actually, it's useful. One of the very early, I think it's episode 4 or 5, we had my friend Carly, and she supports people with severe mental illness to get access to the NDIS, and a few other things. But anyway, she was talking about how having the yes-no list now sort of makes it slightly easier, because sometimes some of the people she works with actually want really big things that are just not going to happen. And when she says, no, look, you're just not going to be funded for a jumping castle out the back, they get angry. And so being able to say, look, this isn't me saying it, here's the yes-no lists, has significantly helped. Now, that's a great way that it's been useful. There are many, many instances where it's very frustrating because, as we've already discussed, disability is very individual, and to blanket say this is yes, this is no, I think is so anti the original idea of the NDIS that it is so mind-boggling why they did this. So, panel, any comments?
I think that it is so often in a really complex psychosocial space, especially, but in all spaces, but creative problem solving is needed, right? So we might have someone who really struggles to engage, and the only way they'll engage is on a long drive, but, technically that transport is not, maybe that's not a yes-no list, but it's still not, closely related enough, and that sort of not being able to creatively problem solve can be difficult, but I'm always a big fan of externalising bad news out of someone's direct support network, right? It's so valuable for stability. And so, sometimes being able to say, well, when we say, oh, look, I'm pretty sure the NDIS is not going to fund that based on my extensive experience and what I've, with, other people and their communication, it sounds like you're saying no, right? But when you say this is here it is on a no list, like that can be really helpful for, just for externalising that, just for the stability of the support network can be, so. Yeah.
I think that's resonated a lot with the support coordination providers that I work with. But as you're saying, Hannah, it's a bit is a catch-22. It's a double-edged sword. One hand, we've got clarity where those requests are outrageous and not really realistic, but it is to that person, which is fine. But in the old ways, we created this wonderful system where it was an open door of yeses, and now having to kind of do this claw back, although, mind you, some of the people that I might be referring to have also opened those doors. But that's because the government never put structure in there to start with, and now we've got structure and they've gone too hard and too fast in some areas, gone way overboard in other areas, especially in some of the parenting and child safety supports as well, where they're going, we're not going to fund you, but we're also not going to fund it if it's related to a disability need or be inclusive and adaptive as well. So it is very hard on one hand, and then also kind of useful to go, hey, look, no, we're not going to fund you a pool in your backyard or a trampoline. Trampoline is a different conversation.
Or goat therapy.
Goat therapy is the one that's in the guide.
Yeah, goat therapy.
But if it's goat therapy delivered by a qualified individual, then they can. If the goat's got the
goat getting paid.
Psych prac. No, so if it's still delivered by a qualified therapist, then if that's the modality of their therapy, then it's still okay, right? I hope I'm not.
I guess it's, see, I see a lot of debate around, music therapy and art therapy.
Yeah.
And without sort of dipping into your expertise, there is a place and a time and a place for things like art therapy and music therapy, especially for those who are either anxious and not wanting to talk to somebody, or don't know how to express themselves, and maybe that might be their way in which they express themselves.
Yeah.
And so there is a place for certain therapies. I do like that there is an empirical reliance. Now, when it comes to the question about a qualified therapist, there's debates as to what that qualification looks like. But it's a bit contradictory in my eyes from, so if you think about other government-funded sort of sides of things, like just take simple Centrelink. People get paid to go on, for support on Centrelink to prop themselves up, get employment, all of that sort of stuff, yet there aren't those stipulations as to what you can spend your money on. There is sort of, in the lower socioeconomic sort of places around here, we'll give you a Visa card that you can spend on groceries, and that, that's a trial sort of situation. But ultimately, it's, a little bit, here's money for you to do what you want. And yet, for something that is actually, arguably for capacity building, for, that it will be used responsibly, now we've got, conditions on that. It's a little bit, doesn't sit well, but I can see why. I think it's missed the mark a bit.
Yeah, I think the intent was probably always there to, we need a bit of clarity and transparency. That's where I think it came from originally was, we've got this confusion. We don't know what's in, we don't know what's out. Can we do this? Can we not do that? A goat's in, goat's out. Cow therapy's okay, goat therapy's not. Whatever it is. But I think they lost it in translation by nature of the complexity of the sector that we're in. So it's hard to create black and white in an individualistic space, but I think the intent there maybe some rigour, or at least a framework might be a starting point, rather than potentially an absolute no in certain areas. Like for SDA, for example, we're actually on the yes and the no list because we're that cool. So, but there's some things, and it comes down to things like modifications. So they're happy to support modifications the first time they get installed, subject to terms and conditions apply, and making it work and getting it approved. But let's just pretend it's on the yes list, so it's approved. But they'll do that, but then if that person moves out, then they won't install the ceiling hoist in the second property.
Yeah.
Because it's not there. They either need to take it with them or this, that, and the other. So it's just challenging. But I think the intent, I don't think it was created there to create harm. Not that I want to defend the agency, but it's, but yeah, I think the intent was there to create clarity, but I think they've kind of missed the mark. I don't know if is it better or worse? Like if it was never introduced, was it better or worse? I'm not sure, but from my perspective, it's probably a little bit better. Like I've got a little bit of clarity in some areas, just this is selfishly from a housing perspective, but we've got a bit of clarity about what is not included. So I can push back on owners or whatever it may be.
And no jumping castles in the backyard?
Only pineapple ones. Yeah. I think we've got that stick in now, Greg. Yeah.
There's a drinking game in this.
I feel like we can run it over the rest of this year's series, and every time we can just drop pineapple in every episode somewhere.
Yeah.
I'll get my royalty checks later.
What about you, Julian? What have you seen with the yes/no list?
So this might go into a topic that we're going into later around the replacement supports.
Yeah. So
that's where it's kind of come with us, where it is on the no list, but we can access it through a replacement support. It is good to have that clarification to be able to talk to the participant around this is now on the no list, but they don't understand all the time, and they're really frustrated of, why can't I get this? Like I could get this 3 months ago, you're now telling me I can't get this. So it's trying to explain to them that, it's like this is out of our control. This is not what we're doing. We can help support you as best we can. And there is a way to get some of these supports if we can use it as a replacement support. However, then that has its own issues around, do they have a support in place already that they will be able to reduce for the NDIS to accept this? And then whether we've done one so far, we haven't had an outcome yet. So it's kind of also working out this next step of what works and what doesn't work in this new system.
Because once again, they also haven't provided much clarity, because I've been working with a few people as well around this and looking at different AT that was originally a yes, but now is not necessarily. And just like trying to work out that navigation of how we put that how that application gets put in and what's the next steps, and also that lovely little trick bit around adjusting some. If you can adjust some hours, then you might get a yes a little bit more. But where have you found that? I think you've just scratched. Everyone's going scribble, listening, because I am.
Yeah, and with the replacement supports, you've also got to have had something in place to start with. But if you didn't, and you need something that's on the no list, sometimes they're just coming back and saying, well, no, because it's not replacing anything. But hang on, I didn't have it in the first place because I wasn't on the NDIS back then. Like, how do I... Like, that's also bits that are not making a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, so there's been some talk in some community groups and things like that around like having to then argue that if you don't fund this, we're not replacing this support, but we're going to need this support in place. So like you're going to have to fork up more money to pay for this support if you don't do this, because they're going to need something. Even though we're not necessarily replacing what's there, it's replacing what's about to come, essentially.
And it's like manipulating the line items just to make something work in that false economy again, right? Just get the job done, get it done well, set them up for success, and then happy days, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, preaching to choir.
Yeah. we couldn't possibly do that. Far out. Cool. All right. Something that is relatively new to the scheme that has really thrown a spanner in the works, I think, is about the new impairments, and that there's now 6 impairments and stuff you if your disability is across different impairments, because you can, guess what, you can only pick one. And so what is happening is that people who joined the scheme from January are getting these impairment notices. Now, the next issue I have with impairment notices is that particularly allied health, but also support providers, are now only allowed to work to support people on their, impairment. Now, if someone doesn't show you their impairment notice so that you know exactly what they're on the NDIS for, and then you provide them with a service that is not technically connected to that impairment, you might not get paid by the NDIS. And so my question is predominantly been around, yes, there's privacy and the participants don't have to show you their impairment notice, but whether providers start putting in policies and procedures saying, well, you must show us your impairment notice or we can't support you, that's then my concern with it.
Can I ask a clarifying question that will probably betray how underprepared I am?
You were a call-in, so we'll thank you.
Exactly. Can I just ask a clarifying question? So say you have a physio, right, working with a participant who has specific physio needs related to their disability, maybe the congenital kind of physical needs, right? And then if they imagine they also have psychosocial disability, right? Maybe like BPD or CPTSD or something. And then imagine that they get injured or something, and so they're struggling a bit more with their mobility or something. It's not some really significant injury because probably scope would become a bigger issue. But hypothetically, if due to their psychosocial disability, they're really not willing, but really not able to go see a different physio for that specific thing or something, and it's because of their can you then provide support? What I'm asking is that if you're in place to provide disability support, but because of someone's disability, they're not able to access other support services, can you then provide that support? Maybe a better example would be like a dietitian that's in place to support swallowing, and someone has an eating disorder and they're, due to their really complex psychosocial disability, are not able to access other mainstream services. Can that dietitian then provide that support under this impairment notice situation?
So guess what?
Yeah.
For something different, they haven't given a lot of clarity around that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
I hope, but have no hope, that Minister Rishworth will give us more information about this. So a scenario I came across was about someone with cerebral palsy, because cerebral palsy, there's a lot of different ways and the ways it presents, right? And so does it fall under physical? Does it fall under neurological? Does it fall under intellectual impairment? Where does it fall? And in that case, if it's one and not another one, then maybe your dietitian is totally out of the picture, or you point blank cannot access the physio. Julian?
So is it that they can only be in one of those 6 categories? They can't be across them?
So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's so new.
Yeah.
And part of it is that there is an operational guideline that I've read through about it, and it is only once you get to the appendix that it has like some conditions will fall under these categories as like a bit of a guide. And so far what that looks like is that you would then only be in one.
Yeah. So if it is only one, that's then a big issue because, a lot of different disabilities present across multiple of those conditions or of those impairments. Plus, from a practitioner point of view, the way each of the categories is described is they're trying to pin it down to one thing, and it's just the way I say, like the physical, the neurological is described is very narrow, and even conditions that you would think would meet that criteria might not meet that criteria. So I haven't seen one yet, and I don't know anyone that's got one, so it'd be interesting to see when that starts happening.
Yeah, it does pose a really interesting challenge for providers, as you said, whether or not they're actually going to give it to us. And it's probably something that we've spoken a few times about. I know our good friend Pink-Haired Lady loves to go on about what your niche is, but then that actually flows into what your eligibility criteria for services.
Yeah.
And I speak about this quite a bit, but I think it's getting to the point that the industry really needs to start to think about who is it that we can actually serve, who is eligible for our service, and not just whether or not they have an NDIS number and a plan, but whether or not we've said it before, whether or not you can meet needs. But now it's more about how we go and gap stop us, the provider, from having issues with the agency, and then also in turn, by effect, bringing the participant into potential trouble as well. Because we've got to remember the people that we're dealing with don't always have capacity, or their representatives don't have the capacity to understand or want to be able to provide that information in the first point. And then us as a provider have got to go, all right, well, there's a bit of a risk here. We've either going to have a financial risk that the agency is not going to pay out. There's going to be a potential financial risk to the participant that they might have to, the agency might come claw money off them, or might claw money off us. And then we might have to claw them off money off them. And it's going to pose quite a very interesting time moving forward. There has been some stuff from the agency that I've seen kind of make it like they're going to give us a card or a piece of paper that might help from a provider side, that will give us enough to kind of go yes or no. But how we're really going to be able to manage and monitor and ensure that we're protecting both providers, or ourselves as providers, but also ensuring that we're not financially putting detriment at the participant on that decision as well. And it's going to really show providers that go really well are going to and really care about this industry are the ones that are going to have that challenging conversation, because it's not a tough conversation. All of us in the room and a lot of listeners are small business owners, and we need to make money to pay our rent, to pay our staff, to pay our mortgage or everything else that we've got going on, feed the dogs and the kids. Maybe not the kids, I'll feed my dog. I also don't have kids, so don't worry, anyone. But Greg, because this is real a service delivery problem with OTs and speeches and housing. It's pretty kind of, the eligibility is straightforward. What do we need? How are we going to do it? Can we fund it? Yes or no? The service delivery space is going to be where we find the most difficulties on how this is going to play out. What your thoughts there, Greg?
Sort of flies in the face of holistic care supports. Because if you've got somebody with a physical disability who also, presents with psychosocial, what takes precedence? And how do you figure out which one, is the primary disability? How do you support both if one's going to be recognised? How do you prove that the psychosocial might be related to the physical? And there's so, as we know, there's countless of people with disabilities who also have the cognitive, the mental health, the psychosocial challenges in their life, and to pin it down to one domain, one aspect is it's actually once again can be quite harmful because you're ignoring a whole other part of their identity. I guess, and when it comes to the confidentiality of, what is, it's really tough to figure out where your priorities and where your supports lie if you don't have the information to ensure that you're doing the right thing. We'll be always guided by the participant as to what they need. We rely heavily on support coordinators, but as we know, there are support coordinators and there are support coordinators. There are some who are quite happy to pick up a phone, and there are some who don't. Some who answer emails, and some who don't. And so if
that
you're
was very diplomatic of you.
I speak well. No, and it makes it challenging because we pride ourselves being a responsible provider. We pride ourselves on the client-directed supports, but if we're going to be directed by a participant, we also need to know that what we're doing is actually part of their plan. But if we're kept in the dark, how do we know?
Yeah.
It's not so much about the money side of things. Sure, every provider needs to be able to, get paid for work done. Okay? And like I said, we do a lot of pro bono stuff, and so does every single person on this panel. But we need to make sure that we are also running a sustainable business, because if we don't, then it's not just a person or a group of employees that suffer. It's actually the whole of our, all those people that we support, all of those people that we employ, everybody. It can get a little bit tough if we don't have all the information.
And I think as a business owner, and I'm sure you agree, Greg, is that level of uncertainty. Uncertainty always just reduces confidence, consumer confidence, so you're less likely or less reluctant, well, you're more reluctant, I should say, to give more. And we actually measure how much pro bono, like 20% of my time is actually pro bono support through guidance, advocacy, whatever it may be, education, podcasts, whatever it may be. But when that 20 becomes 25 and that 25 becomes 30, it's like, it's like an unpaid carer, really, in some capacity as well, where it's kind of modern slavery might be how to describe that. But I think you kind of got to balance that too, and I think there'll be a lot more business owners out there more reluctant to take or have those conversations when they don't have that clear-cut answer of what it's going to be. And that's what I worry about, because great providers like you, Greg, and the team, great providers like everyone else on the panel, I think we want to do good, we want to do the right thing, we want to help support the community, but if we don't have a little bit of support to keep the food on the table, then we're going to leave. And the ones that are going to thrive will be the larger organisations that can basically carry that time and carry that loss, which is great, but I don't really want an industry full of very, very large organisations. I don't think that's what the sector was built for.
Well said.
So let's talk. We are getting close to time, so I will say that we'll really quickly touch on the next one. But I did want to talk about mandatory registration, because I think so many people have so many questions about this. And once again, there's so little information out there about, the NDIA and the Minister for the NDIS, Amanda Rishworth, have their wish list of a time frame. And one thing I will say is that the NDIS have never been able to achieve their time frames.
Which is good and bad, right? It's actually been really good in some areas as well, because they can't crack down fast enough or have that oversight, but very bad in most other ways.
Yeah. So how you spoke before about smaller providers having to spend money now to be mandatorily registered, and we're starting with
support coordinators and SIL providers, but longer term it's going to be everybody. There's a huge risk that a lot of those smaller providers drop out of the sector because registration is an expensive endeavour. And, I mean, they are saying that the Mandatory Registration Task Force are talking about that in order to do this, the cost of registration does have to come down. But, like, to what? And in what way? And how do you then change what the registration process is to make it cheaper? Like, what are you cutting out? That's also my concern.
Well, I actually know the answer to kind of how... I reckon I've got the answer on how it is, because it's on the tier system. It's a which actually, this is an exact same question I got asked last time, and I said... and I kind of said what your response was, but I have a little bit more information this time round. I'd hope so after a year. But the tier system that the NDIS review and then the NDIS registration task force have got is pretty much the same lines. And if you go through the appendix, or however you frickin' say it, and the rest of the supporting documentation in the wonderful 300 and I'm looking at Belinda, 400 odd page document, it does sort of give us this what that looks like, and Natalie Wade being the commissioner for all of this and the co-author for it, where you can start sniffing where they're wanting to go. The question is ultimately what are they going to drop out because of the red tape and the thing. Starting at level 4, which is your high complex, your SDAs, your specialist support coordination, positive behavioural support and implementation, they're going to be done by the commission. The commission's going to set the benchmark of what it, and so every other provider in the auditing company or business gets to go, hang on, if I'm not doing a level 4, I'm not paying you that big money. So auditing world is going to have a big shake-up because we're going to have a benchmark or a tier that we can't really go above because the agency is going to be cheaper, or it's going to be, you're just going to go find a way to upgrade into one of those specialties and get registered under the commission framework for it. And you're probably going to see a few of those auditors drop out because it's not going to be as profitable as it once was. Who knows what's going to happen in that sort of market, but it's going to be a very interesting field. Ultimately, with the agency doing it and a government department doing it, it gets to set a baseline of what the most expensive registration would look like because they're the ones that do it. Everything else falls in a tier 3, which is the bulk of everyone you've been registered for your certifications. That's what your tier 3 are going to be looking like. And then tier 1 and 2 have this kind of, want to call it quasi fill in a form / quasi give me a bit of a diploma or some validation that you've done some extra certificates or have a blue card or some other clearance. And I really hope that they tidy up the state problem around blue cards and all of this at the same time. Vet on the blue card situation.
I think with mandatory registrations, I'll still go back to the premise on why they wanted to bring it in. If being a registered provider eliminates fraud, eliminates scams, eliminates harm, I'm all for it. But you look at the news headlines and a lot of the trauma I'm seeing or a lot of the incidents that are occurring are from registered providers. So to me, I don't know, is the registration system working? If I can buy an off-the-shelf box company for X amount of dollars, get my automatic registration done and re-audit straight away because I've got all my pre-populated documents that I've done there as well, is it actually checking what we need to check, or is it just a box-ticking exercise, which is how I see the registration process? We're a registered provider. We're very happily a registered provider as well. But we work in a very complex sort of housing environment. But for me, what's the point and what's the intent? If the intent is to improve the quality, absolutely. How are we going to check it? How are we going to measure it? And how are we going to define success? What does success look like across that? Because at the moment, I don't see anyone that's a registered provider. There are probably providers out there that I know of that I would never work with. And they're registered providers, but they tick a box. And that's what worries me. And I think the levels of registration, I think, are good to an extent. I think it's proportionary response. I think that's good. Like Jim's mowing, probably don't need as much rigour for mowing someone's front lawn as someone providing intimate care and change of morning routine facilities or something like that. So, But yeah, I just think it's the intent, I think, was originally there, but I think it's actually lost. And I don't know how you guys feel about the registration process, but I don't feel that I'll walk away from that going, I'm an amazing best practice provider now. I've just ticked all the boxes. I've got my documents in check, but...
I like the accountability side of things. I think that there is a lack of accountability from the non-registered side of things. Now, full disclosure, we are certified, registered. So, I might be a little bit biased on that perspective, but I like the accountability side of things. When it comes to the mandatory registration and, the auditing process and all of that sort of stuff, my brain goes to not so much who pays and how much, but who's doing the auditing and what are their qualifications. We've seen a little bit of like that in the aged care space when, after the Royal Commission, how they did a massive drive for, they stopped calling them auditors, they called them regulators. In other words, the police. And the police were there to essentially not so much find compliance, but actually search for non-compliance. And so they created an environment in the aged care space where a non-compliance was actually came from being a rarity to, we only got 3 this time. And that's not a reflection on actually, the aged care industry as a whole. It was more around, well, if you've come into somebody's home to look for, or if you've come into an environment actually looking for trouble or looking for bad, you'll find bad. It might not be bad. There's no such thing as a perfect service, and there's no such thing as a perfect provider, but you can at least see where they're coming from. But when it comes to the qualifications and where they're going to find all these people to do this stuff, I would hope that it's not like where they went with the aged care side of things around, people who have transferable regulatory sort of, backgrounds, because that is black, white, yes, no, right, wrong, as opposed to, as we know, we work in a contextualised industry where it's not that clear cut. And so there needs to be an understanding of, the context around why something is, or why someone is like this, or why, just asking more questions. And if you don't have an understanding of the industry itself, then you'll take that black, white, yes, no approach, and you'll essentially punish providers who are actually doing the right thing, trying to do right, because once again, the check sheet doesn't pan out. And you'll get people punished, and an exodus in the field, and it'll be just, people will be smacked around the face, metaphorically, from auditors or from the commission, or for trying to do right.
You did make a really good point there around the quality of auditors. Part of my role with working with providers is hand-holding through audits and making sure that we're prepared. You're all prepared for it. And there are auditors that I'll go, excellent, that's a good auditor. And there's ones that I will I'll do the face. Okay, and I'll just walk away. Where you have a good auditor, it's not about where you're going wrong. It's about what opportunities that they can find, because they get to see everything from left to right. So if you get a good auditor, they can help the world and go, hey, look, I've seen this, suggest you tweak it slightly, and you could probably do a lot. Because they see a lot of things, and some really cool things, really bad things. On the other hand, as I said, I've seen some auditors that don't necessarily care and tick the box and send in the audit report that you can clearly see they've copied and pasted the 4 lines of auditor has the documentations to support the required evidence under this practice standard or indicator. Which goes into both your point and your point, people at home, Justin and Greg, that it is a really weird space, it's really complex, and it's around the people doing it, whether or not we're being very nitpicky, or if we're ticking boxes, or at the side, on the other hand, you're trying to make the industry better. It's very hard, it's very weird, and I'm very much looking for some clarification as well from the rest of it, and I very much hope that we'll see some actual outcomes of Natalie Wade's appointment within the Commissioner's office, and start seeing what all of this talk is going to do because I feel like they're just starting to go through with showing us what they're going to do with the NDIS review, rather than waiting for the government, especially with caretaker mode, because Natalie Wade doesn't really take a no for an answer. She'll just roll on through the door.
She's the right girl for the job in my mind.
So, I mean, look, the whole sort of... it is a skill to be an auditor. I used to be one, not for a disability, but it's also a skill to actually be audited as well. Know how to push back on an auditor, know how to have that respectful conversation, know how to essentially challenge when you know that they don't know what they're talking about or might be misapplying something to your service or to your, whatever it is they're reviewing. They don't know everything. They're still human. And so if you ask, well, where does it actually say that I need to have this, or this is a misapplication, or you can always ask for clarification and challenge. But I see services and time again almost lay back and cop it, which is sad because, like I said, it is a skill to be audited and it is a skill to push back respectfully. Obviously, you don't want to pick a fight with an auditor because you'll lose. But there is a way to have those conversations that you can all reach some sort of mutual understanding as to what it is you're trying to achieve. Now, it is a good environment right now, or a reasonably good environment, where auditors do have the mindset that they're wanting some good audit. The intention is for an auditor to actually, like what you were saying, Sam, around helping a service, because they do see a lot. They see the good, they've seen the bad, and they can offer advice. I'm hoping it doesn't move out into what has happened in, like I was saying, the aged care, where they were actually prevented from providing those advice, and it was just, we're not going to give you any feedback, we're just walking away. That's where the regulation sort of side of things comes. But if you can pick up the brain of an auditor who's clearly in it for the right reasons, and clearly you can see that they have got good intentions, then by all means, but don't be afraid to push back in the right way if your communication skills are good.
That's a very, very valuable point there, and legitimately what people pay me a decent amount of money to just sit there just to fill in that 15-minute gap.
If you can get an auditor talking about just, well, their home, that, just do, squirrel, butterfly.
Sorry.
So were you saying that you think that the level 4 will be moving to the commission for audit?
Yeah.
See, the thing that do I have time
for a little bit
last
of comment.
Okay. So the thing that makes me really nervous about that for behaviour support is that assessing quality and behaviour support is a very complicated sort of process. And at the moment, the NDIS's preferred quality evaluation is the BSP QE2, the Behaviour Support Plan Quality Evaluation Tool 2. Also a boat in England. But anyway, and the issue is that was designed for use with children in schools. That was the original design of that. And it sort of has been, shoehorned a bit into sort of broader behaviour support for everyone, for adults in the community, for everyone. And there's very few... there's very little, I guess, evidence or support for that. And so where there is a little reference, I've sort of keep clicking through of the BSP QE2 can also be used in the community, and then you actually click on the link, and it's a healthdirect.gov, or it's not this really strong support for it. And the problem is that within this quality evaluation tool, you actually need to have this power dynamic with a participant to get the full score. There's a whole section on reinforcement, and it has to be contingent. And I don't want to bore everyone with the nitty gritty behavioural science, but basically to do that, you need to be able to only give someone something when they're doing kind of what you're wanting them to do. And kind of also the flip side of that is withhold it if they don't, right? And there's huge problems with that, even to be honest, for children, with more emerging understanding of PDA, for example, can start to get a picture of the standard strategies aren't working. Yeah, okay, probably for good reason. But yeah, so there's huge problem. And what I've seen is like some of the participants that come to me with really significant trauma around their like previous providers, a lot of that I can say, hey, this plan scored perfectly, you know, and here you are, and that was the outcome. So for me, I get very nervous if there's that increased regulation from there, because that's their preference.
It ultimately depends on because based on what I'm seeing on the room, not that we've heard anything official, is that practice standards are going to change. There's going to be more, it's going to adjust to suit what the new sort of things coming out of the NDIS review. When that comes, how long's a piece of string? But it is going to be concerning. It's going to be done by a commission. They've been a toothless soul for the better half of 10 or 8 years. I don't know now. A while. But with the new commissioner, it does bring some hope that we're starting to see certain people in the right roles where we haven't had really strong leadership and direction in those key places right now. We've got more assistant and deputy commissioners than we've ever had before. We've got people looking at very specific elements. Going to quote Bill Shorten here, it's time to start doing and less of talking about it, which we can start seeing, as we've sort of discussed, that obviously they're not necessarily doing that all in the right way, but at least we're starting to come towards a movement or a position where we can start to see some outcomes of a lot of this, good or bad, and then we've just got to keep on doing that excellent, the push that we've been doing for like the last 15, 25 years of how do we change, how do we improve this system, and the people that are in there are people with lived experience, people that really listen across the board. So I think, do I say that I'm going to be optimistic like I did last year? Because I ate those words end of last year. I'm not going to, but who knows?
That lived experience.
The possibilities!
I was going to ask, like, when you say there's a good change and a good direction, is that with lived experience at the centre? Because sorry for tapping the table. That's so important. Yeah. So that I'll be optimistic with you, even if we're here in a year.
Yeah. I'd love to share the optimism. The NDIA board has got quite a strong representation of lived experience.
Yeah.
And I won't say anything else.
Yeah.
Everything happened last year still happened.
Oh, that's true. But okay. We won't get into that. Otherwise become sub-level for government policies.
So, Julian, did you have anything you wanted to talk about with mandatory registration?
I don't really have anything to add to everyone else. No,
cool,
that's all right.
Cool. I just wanted to double check because you didn't get a chance. So we are going to end it here. So I want to say thank you to the panel, these amazing people who agreed to come and sit in front of you and talk. So thank you so much to our panel. And another big thank you to Ellie for her amazing work.
And we want to shout out to Bunnings Capera for letting me steal their marquee weights from the weekend.
Hey!
Late notice call around last night.
Awesome. Well, that's it. Thank you all.
And thank you for everyone that's come.
Yes, of course. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Huzzah!
Thank you for listening. Please share with people you know. Until next time, as the Green Brothers say, don't forget to be awesome.